I will kick us off. First and foremost, for everybody up here, thank you so much for coming. I know with how the invite came out, how we're communicating what we're trying to achieve here and what we had asked, it was a little different than a normal ITIC forum session. So thank you very much for being open-minded, participating, and coming today. All right, just to get us started, one, why are we here, and why Africa, the mission and our goal? I'm lucky to have our group chairman here this week. He came in to see how we're doing and see the team and meet with us and see how this was gonna develop. One of the things that he'd always told me when I started with the AMI group was AMI was for profit, for a purpose. We're doing a service, we're providing a product that makes the world better in some degree. So it's this idea of for profit, for purpose. So as I looked at what the assistance industry writ large can do, we asked ourselves a few questions, and one of those questions was, can the assistance industry be an agent of change, be an agent of influence to make something better, improve a process, improve and move the ball forward? So why Africa, right? Well, it's the second largest continent in the world, riddled with countries, and you've got deep variation of health standards, systems, it's all over the map. But when you look at the assistance comparative to, say, Europe or the United States, the amount of assistance companies and resources and attention on that continent is in stark contrast to the rest of the world. And why? It's revenue, it's money, it's right. You follow money. So you have this environment where you've got the most challenges, most barriers, and the least amount of focus and least amount of folks trying to better the situation versus the rest of the world. So that's why Africa. And our mission with this is to start a conversation, to instigate some questions, to ask some hard questions, and look at, can we do something? Can we use our collective intellect to maybe move the ball forward in one direction or the other? It's such an interesting environment. There's so many players between the payers, the providers, so many questions, but again, there's really little focus on the assistance side. So that's what the question is. And the objectives, look, it's open, right? And that's why I said in the beginning, thank you for being open-minded. We are a cross-section of expertise, from regional to what our focus is to operational. And that's the whole idea, right? What I've found personally is the best way to collaborate is to invite a cross-section of perspective and view. So, you eliminate that chance of this group think approach, and you really inject new ideas, new ways of thinking, outside perspective into inside focus. So that's what we're hoping to achieve here, is to answer that question of, do we want to continue this conversation? Do we want to take it someplace? Do we think it's valuable to do so? And if so, how do we want to do that? We laid out an initial thought on how that might look. So essentially 4 phases. This first phase being an introductory discussion with ourselves to answer that question, do we want to have another one? Do we want to keep this going forward? Do we want to invite additional perspectives in? Where do we want to take this? Where do we see the value of our collective voice? If we find that we do want to follow up and take this forward, we're going to try and wrap this up with a collective joint report on what today yielded for us and where we see it going moving forward. Phase 2 being recording and reporting, trying to identify some challenges we think we might be able to bring value to and on the continent of Africa. Phase 3 being a risk treatment. If we do identify something where we believe we can be value added, how do we want to do that? Who would we need to engage, right? What external stakeholders, what internal stakeholders, from ministries of health to organizations such as African Union, et cetera, et cetera. Who do we need to get involved to really affect change? Or at least influence. And influence is half the battle. Phase 4 being recording and reporting. If we do that, how well is that working for us? For those of us who've worked on continent for a long period of time, influence on continent is a slow-moving, process. And then phase 5 being that final report on how all of this is panning out. And again, none of this is going to happen quick, but it all starts with the baby steps of having the conversation and answering for ourselves. Do we see value in our collective voice moving forward? And how do we think that would take shape? And with that, I'm going to hand this off to Dr. Eastman.
Thank you.
And I've got you set up right there.
Thank you.
If you want to switch.
Yeah, I'm going to move just here.
Yeah.
Great pleasure to be here and lovely to be on the panel and to engage with the audience. As a medical doctor, I qualified back in 1984, and my heritage is Ghana and Sierra Leone. So I'm very excited by the idea of doing more for Africa. And some of you may know I did a TED talk about my experiences in Rwanda and Ebola at the time. And one of the things you said, Randy, reminded me of this great quote from a American philanthropist, which was earn, learn, and return. And I think that's, I guess, part of the philosophy within AMI is the return element to it. And the question really is, how does one get to that point? So when we look at Africa, we know that as a continent, it's been extremely attractive to many people over many centuries from an extractive point of view. So people have stolen the gold, the diamonds, the lithium, everything that goes in your mobile phone, and they've stolen the people, slavery and everything else. And as a consequence, the continent has ended up fragmented with false barriers. The countries were just divided up as a cake by the Western nations and the scramble for Africa. And so families were just split across a line. Suddenly you're in this country and you're in that country. And all those tensions are still there and not yet resolved or resolvable. And so the question is then, given that the country has an amazing level of resource in terms of minerals, people, intellect, how can it be helped to get itself out of some of the difficulties that it currently suffers? And if I skip to the next slide, as I said, we know that there's this huge unfair distribution in terms of wealth and healthcare. So within Africa, there are some very good medical facilities, but they're really for the elite. And equally, there are some incredibly poor medical facilities. And we also know that a lot of doctors and nurses who train in Africa, it's not economically sensible for them to stay home. I was watching a documentary recently that showed that the British apparently have a official restriction on stealing physicians from nations which can't afford not to have their physicians. That's the official line. But on the other hand, our General Medical Council holds an exam to help you leave Africa to get to England. So we're sort of two-faced about it. So we say don't come, but equally we set the exam in Africa so that you qualify to come. And unfortunately, that means that we drain a lot of the talent from Africa. And if we look at our National Health Service in England, it's suffering. And we know that we're going to steal a whole bunch more people just to prop it up. So that is part of the ongoing problem. Now, in terms of countries, and the previous slide just summarized the lack of medical staff per thousands of population. But I'll tell you a story from my own experience, which is the reality, is that you can train a doctor, you can train a nurse, you can encourage them to work in their own country. But if their own government doesn't pay them on time, their motivation drops, as all of our motivation would drop. And so they become part of the problem, because then they need some baksheesh, some other way of earning a living. And that is only going to be them saying to you or your relatives, we'll treat you only if you give us X or Y or buy your drugs at the market. And so these are part of the ongoing problems that I don't think anyone's going to find an easy answer to solve. One of my heroes at the moment, you can hear him on Desert Island Discs, is a doctor called Wahid Aryan. And Wahid was a refugee from Afghanistan. He came to England when he was 15. He was promptly put in a jail. He subsequently got out of jail and subsequently managed to get himself into a medical school in the UK, managed to get himself to Cambridge University, managed to get himself to Harvard, and he gives back every single day. And he started a telemedicine group called Aryan Healthcare, which has won prizes from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the UN, and everyone else. So this is an amazing example of somebody who literally has earned, learned, and returned. And he just an exceptional person. But he makes these points that in an emergency, especially in a pandemic, you don't have time to create a perfect system. You activate across a plan that is as good as it can be, and move as quickly as you can and make adjustments as you go along. The problem evolves. And I think your point about the first steps is exactly that. No one will come up with the perfect solution. And the perfect solution doesn't really exist, because what does exist is action. As Aristotle says, the purpose of knowledge is action, not knowledge. And once you act, then you learn, and then you adapt, and then you evolve, and then things get better. So this first step, I think, is very crucial. The Chinese proverb, tell me, I will learn, teach me, I will remember, involve me, I will do it, I think is very apt, because we've often had a top-down approach to solutions in Africa and other developing nations, where we've kind of zoomed in, said we're the experts, we've got all the answers, and you do as we say. But we know that doesn't work. And two examples that I would like to refer to is, one was Anthony Bourdain, very nice guy, unfortunately killed himself. But when he was doing his food program, he was in Haiti, and he thought it would be a great idea to give the crew food to the locals. A lovely idea. But a riot broke out and people were hurt and injured. Now, we see that all the time, people coming in, distributing stuff in a way that's just going to cause a riot. That's never going to work. You've got to find a way of dealing with the local elders or the local wise person who can say, that's great that you're going to make this donation, but don't do it this way because it's going to cause predictable problems. A medical anthropologist is somebody that everybody needs to involve in their program. I remember when I was doing my master's in public health, there was a case where the British had built these amazing clinics in India, amazing, beautiful clinics, and the local women didn't go. And afterwards, they sent in Helen Lambert, and Helen spoke to the local women, and they said, well, we associate those clinics with forced abortion. And so unless they had talked to the women at the beginning, before they built the fancy palaces, then that problem could have been solved. So you just waste money time and time again if you don't get local engagement, local involvement early in the process. So one of the key things that I think is very important, that the traditional approach has been very much the West coming in as the conductor of the orchestra, the expertise, the high tales, let's do it this way. But as Brian Eno says, the better solution is to look at the problem like we're all in a band. So somebody's a bass player, somebody's a drummer, somebody's a guitarist, somebody's a lead singer, and you're all different, but your contributions come together to create something fantastic and something worthwhile. Who'd have guessed that the Stones would still be going all these years later? So I'm going to skip that one, and this is from Public Health. it's an approach where you look at all the different ways you can do it. It's called the Bronze Way. So you look at the benefits, you look at the risks, you look at the alternatives, you look at the unknowns, you look at the doing nothing option, because sometimes that is the best option, and you try to ensure there's a safety net for whatever your program is, and for the fact that some things predictably may go wrong. And so I think what AMI is hoping to do, I believe, is something that's about active collaboration, listening to local voices, engaging with local voices, and us all being part of the same band and the same team. And I think this quote about getting the band together is very relevant as well. My eyesight isn't good enough to read it, so I'm going to ask Lorian if you'd read it out for me from here.
So some kind of independent global health authority would be the ideal platform for compiling medical data, monitoring potential hazards, raising alarms, and directing research and development.
And that slide's just to remind us that the problem is not solved by having a WHO. It's not solved by having a World Bank. It's not solved by having a UN. Any large organization after 60 or 70 years reaches its point of internal collapse and inefficiency. And as we saw during the pandemic, WHO got sidelined by a lot of other interests. And I think that that's why there is a genuine role for people like AMI to be active in this space. And I believe that will bring me almost to my last slide. And I'll ask you to read that one as well, Lauren.
Just checking, just checking. So give a man a fish and he'll feed himself for a day. Teach a man to fish and he'll feed himself for a lifetime.
Thank you. And I think that, so I think the aim of what we do is to be the guide by the side, not the sage on the stage. And I think I'll finish there if I may. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fiona,
My turn.
it is your turn.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me today. I've been asked to come in here, and I'm not doing it purely, although some of my slides are directly related to repatriation of water remains. I do actually have a vast experience of 26 plus years in the assistance. So I started as a coordinator, worked my way up, and I've worked for companies in the United Kingdom and the United States. So very much used to the operational side of things. But we're focusing on Africa today. I'm starting a slide, and I wanted to do this. This is mainly for a repatriation out of the United Kingdom back to one of the African countries. And it was just to highlight that even at that stage, the vast difference required in the documentation and the permits required to complete that repatriation. If you look at the slides, I mean, it just varies. And throughout pandemic, we actually had another layer of documentation. So you thought you had everything, you would present to an embassy and they're like, no, we're missing this document. So it is a constant change, and we have to keep track of all of this in the UK, so it's a lot of work keeping it up to date. But looking at the chart, I mean, the country with the most documentation for us to do for repatriation from the United Kingdom is back to South Africa. Okay, all the other countries varies. Some countries actually need permits for entry from their own Ministry of Health, which the family need to obtain through the local authorities in order to get the necessary permit that then has to reach the embassy in London in order for them to actually stamp the documents to us to allow us to continue. So immediately, it's not the same, you know. Yes, some of the documents that you need are standard, but it varies from country to country as to the requirements. Some are very straightforward, some aren't. Some require that we take a coffin to the embassy for sealing, some don't. So that was just to give you a little bit of a snippet of the variances. So the first slide was mainly to do with repatriation of whole body remains, and the second one is cremated. But again, they both, even if it's cremated, you still need documentation. So you still need to go off the permits, and it's still, it varies from country to country. There's no absolute standards there. Complexities in dealing with situations from our perspective, I was just going to go over very briefly one case study. So we were actually appointed by a mass disaster company to assist with the terrorist incident in the BP Arminas terrorist incident back in 2013. So it did involve, obviously, it wasn't just deaths in that case, it also involves people that were severely injured. We dealt with the deceased, obviously, and then the assistance companies involved that managed the product, the BP dealt with the medical side. And that was quite complex because obviously it was a terrorist incident, the deaths occurred in various different manners, whether people were shot or whether they had bombs strapped around their waists. So we appointed our agent to assist on the ground, and obviously there were teams that went out to assist. And as and when formal identification took place, there was all the coordination on getting everybody back home. We dealt with 9 British in that incident and about 19 from the Philippines and a couple from Japan. But it was waiting for that whole process for the DNA testing to be completed, because obviously you couldn't run the risk of repatriating the injured person. It was, we at Rowland Brothers, we actually dealt with this case for probably, it lasted about 6 to 7 months in total. And one of the British guys, we actually repatriated 4 times. Now I say 4 times, it's because he had a bomb straight around his waist. Every time they came across a body part and the DNA confirmed who he was, that part got repatriated. So it was quite traumatic, sorry, the size just wrong. So and it was quite complex dealing with the situation at the time. And that involved a lot of coordination from a lot of different companies, from medical teams. You know, obviously we weren't just dealing with the British. You had all the different nationalities, so all of that documentation varies depending what your nationality is and where you're going to. So very, very complex. But at the end, obviously, everybody did get home. Quite complex. Talking about that one, I don't have it on the slide, but not so long ago we dealt with another one, and some people may be a little bit familiar with that. But there was another terrorist incident in Somalia. And again, we were asked to assist with a repatriation from Somalia back to Croatia. We don't just deal with British coming in and out of the United Kingdom, we're very global. So we were asked to assist with that one, and the person was severely burnt. So DNA had to take place in order to ensure that we had the correct person. Somalia is very difficult. So DNA was obtained, and then that was actually taken into Kenya, and then South Africa assisted with the DNA testing. The timeline was quite long because you can't really start your repatriation until you've got firm confirmation of the identity is correct. So the incident, the death occurred on the 23rd of March, and DNA testing results weren't received until the 6th of May. So quite a long period of time. Once DNA testing was complete, then there was a further delay with all of the paperwork and documentation and permissions to actually repatriate. So it was quite timely. Finally, the repatriation actually took place in June. But a lot of work goes on in between the start and the finish. A lot of follow-ups, a lot of coordination, a lot of communication with governments, with embassies, trying to chase, trying to speed up documentation, which is very, very complex. But you know, where there's a will, there's always a way, and there's always a solution to every single problem. Key challenges in our world, all kinds. You've got the faith challenges, you've got the country where the death occurred, you've got the cause of death. They all become key challenges. For somebody who has passed away and for families, faith comes into it, or they expect things to happen like they would at home. And quite frankly, that does not happen in a repatriation. Normally, we always say 7 to 10 days from the time that the authorities give you permission, that's when you can actually complete the repatriation. But in reality, it really depends how somebody died. We've just talked about cases, the DNA testing, well, it's not going to be 7 to 10 days because you've got to go through that process. So it all varies. If there's faith requirements, you can't comply with the 48-hour rule because you just simply cannot repatriate them out of the country within time. So it's dealing with all the complexities and the challenges with families, explaining the whys. So there's an awful lot of work that goes into it. It's working with the assistance companies and other providers so that they don't deliver promises that we can't keep, because maybe it's a lack of understanding of the processes. A lot of coordination takes place with everybody. Partnerships in individual cases, I've got a whole bunch up on that slide, because in our world, we all cross over. So when we repatriate mortal remains, we're working with assistance companies, we're working with embassies, we may be working with the police, we may be working with a hotel because they've got the personal belongings. There's lots and lots of crossovers between everybody really. It's not just us doing our bits, we rely on working together and everybody communicating. And depending what country you're in, it's challenging. In some of the countries in Africa, it is challenging, okay, because of you know, the structure may not be there, and so you do rely on coordinating a lot with other people to get things going. And what you don't want to do is cause huge delays if you can find a quicker solution by working with other people to resolve that problem. So to just wrap up my conclusion on this, so the key challenges, I'll read them from this, I think this, the scale of the challenge, if you've got the importance of the network, so like what we're saying, I think this is brilliant to actually have this session going here, because we all have different levels of expertise and we can all bring something to the table. And I'm a firm believer, and having worked in assistance, that if we work together and we draw on the expertise of all the various different aspects or different companies that can bring to the table, together we can actually achieve and resolve things maybe quicker by supporting each other, drop down the barriers of who's who. That doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you're dealing with humans and you're dealing with families. So why prolong their agony if you can actually work with people and call upon people that you know can assist and drive things forward? So personally, I think this session is very good. I think it's a good starting point. I think it would be brilliant to continue. And there's a lot of expertise sitting around that, you know, something really good could happen by everybody collaborating, working together, and you know, ultimately for your clients, which are the corporations, but ultimately the families, because they're the ones that at the end of the day, or those that survive the patients. So yeah, I think it's brilliant.
Ooh, you gave me goosebumps seeing that. It was amazing. Well said.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think thank you to Randy, the AMI team, and everyone here this afternoon for the opportunity to talk. I'm going to be going through the key challenges in providing aeromedical evacuations and repatriations in Africa. We're hearing a lot of what's wrong with Africa, but there's also a lot that's great, and I think that sums it up, that quote on the screen. I've been involved also in aeromedicine and the assistance industry for more than 20 years in Africa. Been a flight paramedic, so been out doing the flights, managed flight services, both fixed wing, rotoring across the continent, and done assistance services across the continent. So I've had a good look into both sides of things and how it all works. Go through, I mean, there's a lot of attractions that bring companies to Africa. I think we've been through a few of them, so I'm not going to belabor the point. But we all understand the natural resources and things that are there ready for extraction are of huge interest to the companies that we cover and serve. And they're sending employees to come and get that. And we need to look after them while they're there. So, yeah, Africa is not a country, but it's a continent like no other. It has that which is elegantly vast or awfully little. And as you can see by that map, Africa is really big. Okay, it's larger than the United States, China, India, Japan, and the whole of Europe put together. Incidents taking place in one part of Africa very likely have little to no impact on other countries in Africa. There's 54 countries in total, and the infrastructure, political, and economic conditions vary considerably between the countries. There's anywhere between 1,000 and 2,000 languages, of which at least 75 have more than 1 million people speaking those languages on the continent. The landscape can present challenges that are not often encountered outside of the continent and present unique difficulties when dealing with medical emergencies and other travel assistance related cases. Travelers into developing countries may easily be caught up in a location where it's difficult or even impossible to gain access to medical facilities or trained personnel. So some of the challenges we experience: vast distances. The vast expanse of the continent contains everything from dry deserts to snow-covered mountains. Travel time and risks associated with journeys may be very high, and often expatriate workers and others requiring air ambulance evacuation become ill or injured far from formal hospitals or airports that can accommodate air ambulance aircraft capable of traveling large distances in a short amount of time. Patients' location from the air ambulance base has an effect on the pilot's flight and duty times available, which is strictly regulated, and this often has the negative effect of limiting departure times that can be undertaken from the home base and requiring mandatory overnight rest stops in order to remain compliant with the regulations and ensuring the highest levels of safety. This requires complex coordination and planning before returning the patients to their destinations for upgraded medical care. The permit processing time and operating hours also vary considerably from country to country. Journeys of even short distances can easily take a large amount of time to cover on roads, and these roads can either be non-existent or in poor condition, traveling through villages with pedestrian traffic and numerous security checkpoints where the potential for harassment exists. The rainy season can turn a 6-hour road trip into a 48-hour off-road expedition. Greenfields exploration takes teams into very rural, underdeveloped areas, often with only very basic support. Sometimes there's not even roads. They need to make the roads as they go to get into those areas. Shipping is also big around Africa, so from time to time it's necessary to evacuate patients off of ships for care. The healthcare resources and infrastructure also face a number of challenges, including lack of funding, resources, and poor infrastructure. Private healthcare facilities are most often located in major cities only, and may have limited specialist services and equipment.
Equipment and infrastructure is frequently outdated and poorly maintained. Quality and standards vary within and between countries. Facilities frequently use terms such as ward, intensive care unit, and even doctor may have a very different meaning to what you're accustomed to. Facilities may have an operating theatre and report that they're able to do surgeries. However, the anaesthetist is an anesthetic nurse. A general surgeon may be operating on a spine. Sterility can be a problem. Outdated equipment and procedures, for instance, with keyhole surgery and things like that, they don't have that technology, so they opt for open incisions. And all of these expose patients, insurers, patients and insurers to potential medical complications, extended hospitalizations, and of course, additional costs. Depending where you find yourself, facilities can vary from very basic systems to world-class, internationally renowned and accredited institutions. Ground support. Formal emergency medical services exist in around 1/3 of African countries. The clinical care provided can differ from recognized advanced life support ground or HEM services to under-equipped vehicles manned by a driver with no medical experience. Availability of these resources has improved over the years. However, they're also largely still located in built-up areas and towns. When an ambulance is not available in the area, local resources need to be utilized as best as possible. So these can include private motor vehicles, pickup trucks, to bicycles with trailers that can carry a patient. Very few specialized rescue services exist around the continent, and military assistance may be needed from time to time for operations such as hoisting patients out of places like the Fish River Canyon in Namibia, and other places that can't be accessed by conventional methods. Just want to take you through a case that we did a couple of years ago. So we call it the elephant roadblock. To demonstrate the challenges, we requested to evacuate a foreign patient with a suspected pelvis fracture from a bush camp in the South Luangwa National Park in Zambia. So there were no medical facilities or resources available in the area to assist the patient. We dispatched a medical team to fly from Johannesburg to the national park to stabilize and evacuate the patient for medical care. There's no ambulance services available, so there was a van from the lodge that had to be converted into an ambulance to carry the patient. On arrival at the patient's bungalow, there was an elephant that was eating breakfast off of the roof and the neighboring bungalow. So you had to sidestep the elephant to get to the patient. While preparing to load the patient into the newly converted ambulance, there was a vervet monkey sitting inside on the stretcher. There would have been an interesting conversation with the port health officials landing in Lanseria. On the way back to the aircraft, there was a roadblock caused by an elephant that was blocking the only road out of the national park. So that lasted for 20 minutes while the pilots had to wait for them to return with the patient to the aircraft. The types of patients that we see also becomes challenging. Patients can vary from local population requiring an upgrade in care to expatriate workers and tourists from across the world. The medical profiles vary from the elderly with multiple chronic conditions, at risk for things such as cardiac events or trauma from falls, to younger travelers keen on experiencing high-risk activities in very remote areas. Highly skilled expatriate workers regularly suffer from chronic conditions, so you'll find your highly qualified geologists and things like that going into very remote areas with a long list of medical history and medications that need to be taken with them. Delays in the acceptance of an evacuation may be experienced from time to time also due to underwriting decisions that need to be made regarding the pre-existing conditions and excluding those while confirming cover. Outbreaks and infectious diseases. So potential diseases include malaria, yellow fever, hepatitis, and many others. Ebola and other viral hemorrhagic fevers remain a constant risk, as we're seeing now in Uganda. A large number of events are monitored by organizations such as the WHO on an ongoing basis, with anything around 150 events across the continent at any one time. This can hamper the movement of patients from country to country or region to region, and also results in public health officials requesting additional laboratory testing and medical information before accepting them into the country. The availability of the testing can often be problematic. We found during the COVID pandemic, PCR tests were an absolute requirement to get a patient into the country, but you could be in a location where there is no testing. So a sample needs to be taken, needs to be sent to one of the major cities, tested, results sent back. Then you can start the application to bring the patient into South Africa. Poor support, so communications with medical facilities and providers, trying to obtain up-to-date medical information. Judging from discussions that we've had over the last couple of days with people at the conference, it's a major challenge, I think, for most companies getting up-to-date information. You can often arrive at your destination, find a patient waiting with their baggage when you're expecting an ICU patient, or the alternative, you're expecting somebody waiting with their baggage and they're fully ventilated and requiring intensive care. Security. The ability to undertake air evacuations can also be limited by terrorism, extremism, wars, and other diverse threats. Local conflict in the vicinity has the potential to close airports to civilian traffic and also restrict movement outside of the airport for patient transfers. Lack of reliable and up-to-date information is also concerning. Just some of the learnings that we have over the years operating in Africa. Know Africa. There's a lot of misconceptions surrounding Africa, but the continent is far more than the sum of its stereotypes. You need to understand all the idiosyncrasies, and the distinct needs are vital. Understanding where your clients are traveling, what they'll be exposed to, and what's available should the worst of situations happen. Be adaptable, so don't adopt one view on how a case will be managed. It differs all the time. Every day you got something new. So activate your provider soonest. Insurer approvals, mission planning, documents and medical results that are required, provide those as soon as possible so that your provider can get to work and get everything necessary to start the mission. Take note of the information provided regarding mission timings by your provider. Know the providers you deal with, so also establish relationships with your providers, know what their capabilities are, know what equipment they carry, what they can offer. In terms of improving healthcare access, equality, and standards in Africa, I just wanted to share a short story just around a client of ours. So in 2012, a South African doctor finishing up a remote site clinic rotation in Madagascar decided that she wanted to settle in Madagascar and provide medical services to the broader population that did not have access or were unable to afford services. Utilizing her own money, the clinic was started under a tree in her garden and later expanded to the point that she rented and equipped a facility. The clinic was run on the Robin Hood system, whereby she would utilize the profits made from those that could afford to pay to subsidize those that could not. Over the years, they've been able to secure a number of small sponsors that have enabled them to keep them operating and growing the services offered to the community. The clinic now offers a 24-hour emergency doctor consultation service, a dispensary, maternity ward, small imaging and laboratory service, and an 8-bed ward for overnight stays. They have community service projects which they undertake. The area was hit particularly hard during COVID with many job losses and increasing poverty. Vegetable gardens were started. Community were able to come and take fresh vegetables, fresh food to feed their families. Hand washing projects and the availability of soap and water in populated areas to try and reduce the spread of the infection. And then schooling is also not free in Madagascar. And with the increased poverty, less children were attending, so they managed to secure funding for 100 children in school and provided support and ongoing learning for them during the very restrictive lockdowns. They've started community clinics, which are offered free of charge on a daily basis to more than 300 patients. So these include family planning, pre- and postnatal care, regular follow-ups for mother and children up to the age of 5 years old, and a burns clinic for children. 10 years later, the clinic has continued positive growth with a team of 47 committed individuals making an impact, offering services not usually available to a large part of the community. Single most important thing that I can convey today is that an initiative, no matter how small, can have a large impact on the people in the area where that initiative takes place. Thank you.
Fabulous.
Thank you so much for amazing idea. Hopefully that it will always existing. Of course, our subject, it was related to the COVID crisis, but for honestly, I never prepare for speech because I always love to match what people talking about. Of course, Charlotte always getting headache to prepare for me speech, but I never followed. So, and I was totally happy to be the last one to be the last one really to match what people said. And so, thank you, Doctor, so much. It was very inspiring speech for me. I'm African by myself. I'm doctor with around 17 years experience as a doctor as well. Then I went into the assistant business. Our subject is very interesting in a 2 points of view. We are looking for improving assistance services in Africa, as from which aspect, like business-wise, or we are looking to improve service in Africa, because 2 points of view is totally different. That's why I thank the doctor, because it was very inspiring when he's talking about the fact on the land, how it's going in Africa. It's not about business-wise, it's not about our how our business could go better in Africa. I was more inspiring because a month ago I was in a big roadshow through Dubai Health Authority and Dubai Tourism in Africa. Went through many countries, around maybe 12 countries, in a roadshow for about 6 months. Last it was South Africa, Ethiopia, Uganda, Canada, Kenya as well. And I was always attending, just looking for solutions, like what people looking for. My subject, it was about the COVID crisis and what we learned from COVID and how COVID crisis affecting us. Whatever going on as a crisis, I wanted to say big thanks for COVID because it was the only time where we getting back to our mind, didn't go running just business, because COVID showed us a lot which we never expect. Like whatever you run, one day something will stop you, even out of your hand. We get close to each other. We get to know that it is not just a business. It is a matter of life. It's a matter of life experience, and we really got a lot of experience. And as I know that, as I see that, the progress development we got as a company, as my experience in a year of lockdown, it is much bigger than I got in 8 years before for the running 8 years. We got a lot of ideas, a lot of digital solutions. We know how to be always ready. Here we are because Africa, they always live on that. They never know what is tomorrow. And they always want to think how to be ready for tomorrow. Not like how we live, to be honest. Let's be honest. Let's be on the spot. So here, what always given us direction to think which point of view we are talking about. If we are talking about our business, how to grow it in Africa, assistance service or repatriation, whatever, end of the day, it's a knowledge. So when I was in the roadshow, I was discussing a lot with the people on the spot, and they don't have knowledge, like they have to learn. Even in Kenya, they involved me in Qatar. This is a Qatar authority and for tourism authorization to give some, because they don't know how even to use traveler insurance. Like they were telling me that just learn us how to. They didn't know about traveler insurance. They didn't know how to use it even. So coming back to the idea that it's end of the day, it is a knowledge. I came back from the roadshow and I start to think, what next? Then we decided to grow a very big program in Africa, and we're gonna start 2 countries by 2 countries. We started already in Uganda and Kenya, and when I start to study a bit statistics, how it's going in Africa, to reach B2C sector in Africa, it's very hard. You need thousands of years. Really, you need thousands of years to reach the B2C. And let's be honest, whatever experience we have for even 20, 30 years, our experience is only B2B business. We don't know how to reach B2C business. So it was also my idea how to launch our program, which is giving us a chance to reach people through B2B, let's say B2B2C. So we start now to be physically located in Kenya and Uganda as a beginning. And we're gonna start most of all digital. So our main target, how to reach people online and offline, but digitally, how to go through B2B. What I mean by B2B, we are launching a big digital program for anything related to traveler, number one, because anyhow, whatever we do, there is a business part. So we cannot just go to do, let's be honest, doctor said one word, whatever you train the doctor, if there is no benefit, he will not be involved in anything. He will just give up. It's very logical. Let's be logic. So whatever we are doing, it's related to travel through digital solution, plus how to reach internally to every one person as a B2C. So our program is mostly biggest. It will be a very big training program for everyone involved. What I mean involved with us, because this is the only channel how we can reach them. So, for example, for healthcare sector, we will have a very big program through United Arab Emirates and Egypt for doctors, for nurses. We're gonna send to Africa, and we're gonna import some of them with a paid program. If I said I'm doing that just for free, of course I would be a liar. It is not just for free. It's our idea to support one big program for us as a medical tourism, because it works really well. So you train the doctors will be back to work, so they will always recommend you. Let's be honest. So it is one big target, but in the same time, yes, it's target, but in the same time, when I say, for example, in Qatar, so we're gonna train travel agencies, we're gonna train everyone involving in the traveler process. So this will help us later on if you wanna make funeral repatriation, if you wanna make air ambulance, because you are dealing with every small person, but we don't wanna in the end to be our main target that mission done, because everyone is happy that mission done. The best ever I learned from COVID time, because people was emotionally, as a doctor, you understand how emotionally affected every COVID patient. So the best what I learned in that time, how to move the service, doing service to be a customer service. Because the difference is huge between I'm doing service, I'm happy that mission done, and to do a customer service that people need to feel someone next to them. This is always how it's going in Africa. People always feel themselves, no one next to them. Exactly what we had the feeling in COVID time, how we were struggling without help. Everyone was isolated for 15 days, 20 days alone. He doesn't understand even what is tomorrow, if he will leave or no. Who can help him? Whatever next people to you, they are without value. No one without value. Here's how they live in Africa, how I saw by my eyes when I go in the roadshow every month or two, we go for roadshow. So we study very close. So target to reach people, I can say we cannot reach people B2C in Africa. It's not easy for us. Language barrier, mentality barrier. A lot of barriers can meet us. But we have to think very well how to do for a long-term plan, not just to improve something, to make our service easy, to make our business picking up, to do more benefits. It's not the main target, main issue. Because I remember one small thing which it was always giving me happiness. When I started working as a doctor in a public hospital in Egypt, I started to have my own business, and I started to really get money, a lot of money from my business. And I was going my shifts in a public hospital where my salary, maybe you don't believe me, $30 per month or $40. I'm not kidding. No, really, I'm not kidding. So what I was doing, I was very happy because I really have business, I really have money. I was working and I receive poor people who come into public hospital, and I'm going running to pharmacy to buy them medicine by my money and give it to them. If I don't have such stability in my life, I wouldn't feel that people, I wouldn't do that. So same exactly when I enter Africa, of course I go to Africa because everyone said, wow, Africa, it's some money. So you have to attack Africa, you will do a lot of money. And this is truth. Everyone attacking Africa just because it's a source of big money. But when you go to see how everyone is struggling there, how people say, no, you have to think different way. You have to think, do your business, do your money, but give something for the people. So, and this will reflect back to you 100%. This is what exactly the doctor said. This is what exactly you said. Such give something, give education. This is what we can do. We are not living in Africa. We cannot do a lot. We have to give education. We have to get knowledge. We have to give some reasonable solutions. When I say digital solution, not everyone in Africa can make an application and open internet and spend the money on internet. Just believe me. So, but we have to reach them through available channel from our side because we have limited also. We have our own life. So this is how I see situation, how I see how we have to think which direction we should discuss more and think how to develop the service and healthcare and reach more close to people. And it will never go from distance because whatever, I'm doing service in around maybe 27 countries, but it will never go like service when I'm physically existing in 4 countries. I'm physically existing in 4 countries. I will never be on every, like in routes until I would be physically existing. And this is our direction. Even by 2023, we're gonna be spreading for around 15 countries, at least in Africa, physically existence with a really huge program of education. Education not only medical, education not only for doctor, for every sector. We have to contact even Ministry of Health, Ministry of Tourism. So we have to be in contact with every person related to healthcare sector, traveler sector, because anyhow we have to get money in the end of the day. It's not it is a main target, but this is my direction: education, feel the people, feel how they live, what is their demands, and we have to react. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, Charlotte, that I changed my subject, but I need to. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Okay, let me have a little look where we are, because it's not what I can see on screen. Right, just so you can all see the beautiful pictures.
I changed it.
It's your prerogative. It's absolutely fine.
It was matching the
yes.
The inspiration
Yeah.
which is going on.
Okay. Fabulous. Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you all for being here, and thank you to everybody for everything that you've said. As I said, I've had goosebumps. It's incredible. Now, really, what we want to do with our next segment is to start to uncover some of the challenges that are being faced, some of the commonalities, and we don't necessarily expect to come out of this with a conclusion. As we've all said and all stated, this is a long-term project, a long-term goal. And I think, in fact, I would hope that potentially what we start here today is going to continue on beyond our lifetimes. And also, the other thing that I wanted to say is that this is an open and inclusive environment as well. So we are coining the people on stage here today as our committee members, our Assistance Intelligence Committee members, but it is an open forum and we welcome everybody into that space. So please let us know if you'd like to be involved in some way. We would be absolutely delighted to have you. So just to reiterate on what Randy said earlier, we're here today to really sort of answer a bit of a thesis question. How can, or even can, assistance agencies, assistance companies be agents for change? How can we be influencers? How can we start a little bit of a movement here? So today, what I want to do is to pose a series of questions that is open for us to discuss, which is why we're a little bit more huddled than you might typically see in an environment of this nature. So it's really for me to pose some questions and for us all to bounce off each other and to have that discussion and to really start to get to the heart of some of the challenges that we're facing. And I really think if we can start to document some of that, that is really the best we can do today and also a little bit going forward from there. Until we know what we're dealing with, we can't possibly even begin to plan a way forward. I would also love to invite, if anybody has any questions at all, we would absolutely love them. But if I could ask you to perhaps hold them until the end. And if you feel that you don't want to voice it in the room, please feel free to get in touch via email and we can take it from there. That would be wonderful. So I've got the clicker. Right, here we are. So the first question really to the group is, as we've talked about, in a world changed by COVID-19, how is the role of the assistance industry evolving? So we know that in terms of COVID-19, as you said, it really gave us an opportunity to step outside of ourselves, to rethink. And we had some incredible individuals putting their heads together, rising a little bit above their own commercial objectives to collaborate. And that's one of the themes that we've been hearing about a lot at the conference. It hasn't been the subject of a panel discussion in itself, but obviously we're all here and we're piggybacking on the back of us all being together. And this idea that collaboration is key, and really bringing ourselves together to see what we can achieve. Obviously, nobody wants to be giving away their intellectual property. We're not asking anybody to compromise anything, but it's a starting point. So what can be achieved? So, again, just to rephrase the question, how do we see the role of the assistance industry changing and continuing to change in light of what we've experienced in the last 2.5, 3 years? So that is a question for the group. Charlie's got a twinkle in his eye. Go on.
I always say that, but I'll jump in. I think that if we look at COVID as one event, we have to remember that it's going to be one of many events.
Mm-hmm.
And so pandemic preparedness is something that everybody still needs to focus on. COVID is one thing. You could argue it's over, you could argue it's not over, but there's going to be another thing. And one of the issues that underlies pandemic preparedness is the basic state of primary care services in any nation. And if they're not good, then they get bowled over by the next pandemic. So there's been emphasis for ages on improving basic levels of primary care across developing nations and especially across Africa. No one yet has found a way to successfully do that. I think the other thing that COVID has helped us realize is there's a huge value in local production. So if your country can produce its own PCR tests, its own gloves, its own syringes, that makes a huge difference, its own vaccines even, because getting things in when things go wrong is always going to be a problem. So the assistance companies may have a role in encouraging things like local production and may have a role in encouraging the sort of thing that the lady's done in Madagascar. It was a lady, was it, who set it up? An amazing, wonderful initiative. Now, there are loads of little seeds like that across the continent of Africa. And it may be that an assistance company says, right, we see what you're trying to do. We believe in what you're trying to do. We can't throw a lot of money at it, but we could throw some, and we could also throw some expertise to help you grow whatever that is. And, very commendable thing that person has done.
Absolutely.
I'll hop in. I'm going to play off of something that Dr. Monnier mentioned. I think you framed it as it reminded us we have the human element here.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you diagram out your payers, your patients, with the insurance companies, everybody, and you put where your assistance company is, as that human element really became clear again, and we started getting back into clients, organizations, insurance companies even would start asking, well, what else is missing? And we start looking at value-based care, and we start looking at the technology, telehealth solutions and the like. You almost start to push that needle a little bit, and that assistance company starts to get closer and closer to this provider side, because what you're doing and how you're acting and how you're viewing your operations with value-based care, duty of care, you start pushing yourself closer to that. And I think that really starts to shift that needle. And what you brought up with production and the like, during the pandemic, assistance companies and companies with that subject matter expert knowledge found yourselves, we were being pinged by organizations that normally wouldn't reach out to us for solutions they would never usually ask, because they're seeing, well, gosh, nobody has the answer to this. Well, who's closest? Who's that subject matter expert who would? Well, it's the assistance companies or companies with that knowledge, because they are the ones focused on providing solutions that are locally executed. So I think that's one area where this really has started to shift a bit when we look at value-based care, bringing that human element back into it, as well as you now have external actors, if you will, looking at the assistance industry differently because of the IP, the knowledge we have with the local scheme. Yeah.
Would you say that was fair? Would you agree? Yeah, sure. Yeah, and one of the questions that I have as well, again for the group, but it was something that you mentioned there, Charlie, in terms of the local production to be encouraged. How can you give me an illustrative example of how you see assistance organizations being able to start that conversation in terms of supply chains? And
okay, so to my knowledge, and do tell me if I'm wrong, I think most of Africa still has to import gloves and syringes. Would I be right in that? Yeah. And when you think about it, gloves and syringes aren't that difficult to make. And there could be, for example, like an X program where you start an entrepreneurial fund for bright young local people to say, look, could you produce syringes that meet Western standards? Could you produce gloves that meet Western standards? And could you put a proposal together? And even if we can't fund the proposal, we can put it out there to an impact investor who could fund that. So that could be a real start point. So using local intellect, local capacity, and the mineral resources are likely to be there for that to be done.
So really potentially looking at starting a bit of an innovation lab, if you like, and speaking to universities and colleges and things like that to recruit. Fabulous. So in terms of how we can really continue to sort of evolve as an industry, how we can further contribute to the success of overseas ventures, for example, in Africa, whether corporate, government or non-profit. How do you see that evolution going from here? And that, again, is an open question to anyone. Does that sort of strike any notes with anybody? Is that?
I'll jump in with two things. I think that there's two C's I think we always need to keep in mind. One is corruption, one is China. And they're different. But China, I think, is the easy one to start with, because China has, belt and braces approach to Africa. So they're very keen on putting infrastructure into Africa, and it allows them to extract more. So it's a selfish aim, but it's there. And China is committed in some way, shape or form to Africa, whether you like it or not. And I think there's a role for others to engage with the Chinese rather than seeing the Chinese as enemies. Mm-hmm. And I personally think that assistance companies could set up a China-Africa Guanxi Club, which is a friendship club, and within that context, have those wider discussions about collaborative working. So, and I'm not sure that many assistance companies that are non-Chinese have built those bridges with the Chinese, if you see what I mean. So it's actually a specific mission to do that. Then corruption, unfortunately, underlies everything. And I personally don't think Africa is any more corrupt than the West. The West is highly corrupt as well, but Africa has the label of being more corrupt. But the book, The Looting Machine, which I recommend to everybody, summarizes exactly why we have the level of problem that we have at governmental and other levels of problems. So one has to find a way of getting around that issue. You can't ignore it. It's literally the elephant on the road. It's the elephant in the room. It's the vervet monkey in the ambulance. It's there. And you know, you can have a policy that says we are, you know, based on the US fact, anti-corruption, and it's not going to solve the problem, because the corruption is always going to be still there. And it's really, I don't have the answer, but it's a very big chunk of the problem.
Absolutely, yeah, and I mean, I would ask others here as well. I mean, you know, Randy. I mean, you all have such incredible experience, and it, as you said, it is unavoidable. So how do you deal with it? In what guise does it present itself to you on a daily basis, on a quarterly basis, whatever it might be? And how do you cope with that? How do you get around it?
I think that just emphasizes basically the knowledge and the understanding you have to have of what's going on a local basis, and how that changes. I mean, within hundreds of kilometers to a few thousand kilometers can be vastly different.
But Shane, can I ask you a direct question, right? So you're in a country where you know that the only way you'll get the permit is, you know, a bottle of whiskey to that guy there, or the equivalent. And somewhere in your corporate policy it says you don't do that. And so that's a challenge, right? Because the corporate policy says we never give gifts and we never do that. But the reality on the ground is it's not going to happen unless you swing this guy a bottle of whiskey or whatever.
So it happens at a much lower level. I mean, we had an incident where ambulance went to go and fetch a patient, couldn't get back into the airport because the security guard at the gate wanted. And delayed the ambulance for an hour because we're not giving it to you.
Die because you can't give the guy. So
the policymakers are completely out of touch with the reality on the ground. So that's part of the problem, isn't it? But how do you then reconcile the legal teams that are responsible for protecting?
I think you can only not tell them, if I'm honest with you. No, because I think every organization that grows to a certain level has huge legal teams that set the rules, and you know, America has FACT, right? You know, the Foreign and Corrupt Practices Act or something, and people have to sign up to this to be at a certain level of a corporation. So normally you have to accept that you don't give gifts. The reality is you have to give gifts.
Exactly.
And the two are unbridgeable, actually. I don't think there's a bridge.
So my perspective and what I've found, and what I'm sure some of you have experienced as well, and some that are in the audience right now, you know, for lack of a better term, what kind of a ground game do you have? You will find that if you have personalities that are associated with you in a given region, they're the ones that can get something done on your behalf without that bottle of whiskey. Now, finding them and vetting them and getting them as part of your infrastructure takes time. I'll be honest with you. We do a lot of work in North Africa, in Libya specifically, and I'll tell you that's a tough one to navigate. So, but it's a challenge, right? Again, I mean, some of us have heard the term TIA. This is Africa. It's a challenge, and it comes down to that ground game and what does your ground game look like? And that's why when you look at our particular industry, we become those SMEs. Again, some of us in this room, it's because we've developed that infrastructure over a long period of time, and that is what allows us to do business and do it effectively and efficiently and try and circumvent or at least mitigate some of those types of challenges. Yeah.
Fiona, have you found it with Mortal Remains?
We do find it with Mortal Remains. It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, if you're in a situation where somebody simply will not release the deceased to you unless you give them a little bit off the side, you've got a choice to make. Because trust me, if you don't do it, they won't release. So at the end of the day, again, for the benefit of the family and completing the repatriation, and to be quite honest with you, it's going to be such a small amount of money compared to what would happen if you got a severe complaint along those lines, then our agents would probably just slip them the little bit of money so they can open the door and release the deceased. It doesn't happen.
Randy's thinking, I hope this bit's all edited out.
But it does. It's not something that I would say happens all the time, and it doesn't happen in every country. But it's not just Africa that has this problem. It's global.
It's global.
It is a global thing. But yeah, it happens. And on the rare occasion, if you've got that problem and you've got that dilemma, and you need to get somebody out, then for the sake of what may be the equivalent in pounds of a £5, you do it, because the consequences are everything gets delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed. You've got a grieving family, you've got a client, and also you've got to think of the condition of the deceased. The longer,
At a higher level, I think, in terms of assistance company, one other thing that could be thought of is this. At a public sector level, the World Bank and everyone else told all these countries to do structural adjustment, which basically meant don't give public sector workers pay rises. So these people are genuinely poor. They're doing a government role, but they're getting sweet FA in terms of real money to feed their families. So they have a genuine need for that extra money that comes from the West. So in a way, I don't think they're as corrupt as we think they are. They're genuinely broke, and they don't have money to feed their families. So they need that little bit extra. Now, where another way of thinking could be is to speak at government level and say, we appreciate the fact that you've been told by, the World Bank or whatever to restrict public sector pay, but we have thought of some innovative ways that we could supplement the income of some of your public sector workers so that they don't need to do this trawling for cash in other ways or means. Or you might do something very simple, which JP Morgan did for the American government. You may pay the public sector worker, knowing that the government is due to pay that person late. So all you've done is advance payment. So you've said to the government, look, we appreciate you're struggling at the moment and you're paying your teachers or your medics 2 months late. We are prepared to pay them in advance of you paying them. We do expect you to pay us back. But we are solving the problem for you and for that healthcare worker for now. And that kind of idea might be feasible.
To change those policies and processes. And something that we're dealing with currently is with the change in the GDPR requirements and that, and the onus being put on providers, to be more accountable for the management and transfer and storage of that confidential information. And when you're dealing with government departments that are running on free Gmail accounts and free Yahoo accounts, and anybody that's worked in Africa knows that's how email in Africa runs, is on Yahoo and Gmail. And even though they have official accounts, they're still making use of those. And we can have no control over those. And while we can try and influence it, the possibility is very, very small.
But I believe that change is always you could change, because from our experience in business, like how we started 20 years ago or 30 years ago for whatever in assistance sector, and how we changed some kind of mentality or culture, how it's used in some countries, means that always change is available, but it always need time. And same time, this is what I believe, that it will never work when you are in a spot like you are working with a distance. It will never work as the same. So as you are in a spot, you understand where to go, where to change, where to start. And so in my opinion, that change is always available, but always need time. Need time and more effort, I think. So.
And I would say trust. And the reason why I was pointing you, Dr. Munier, is, things I learned is I was building medical infrastructure, referring to our clinics are going to become part of the local fabric. And the more and more we work intimately with folks on the ground in countries, identifying our business as part of the local fabric, things shift, because perspective starts to shift. And that's something I've learned. And you asked that question earlier about which perspective are we looking at, increasing in how we do business or improving things. And I think you can do both, right? Because as things improve, your business model may improve, your business model might evolve a bit, So there's always, I think, room to do a little bit of both. It's my perspective, but yeah.
Oh, perfect. Well, I think with that, if you don't mind, unless anybody has any concluding points to that question, right. So effectively, moving on to questions 2 and 3, I think in terms of how we can collectively amplify our voices to lead the charge and to lead change that ultimately helps the entire industry. I mean, there's a couple of things I'd like to sort of break down there for us, and I'd like to have your opinions on this because potentially at first glance that might seem like a really simple question, but I think in terms of defining some of what we mean by that. So when we say entire industry and we're here together, we talk about the human element in all of this, but how far can we really expect this change to ripple out? So when we say we'd like to support the entire industry, healthcare, what do we really mean by that? So philosophical question perhaps, not necessarily an easy answer, but does anybody have any thoughts on how we might like to tackle that one?
Yeah,
I'll jump in.
You can go.
Sure, I'll jump in. It's an interesting question, and to your point, you have to be a little philosophical first because it's a very complex one at the same time. When you look at the continent, you have actors from governments, NGOs, other health organizations, local organizations from the African Union, for example, to local governments, ministry. There are so many different external players looking at the same problem set differently. Mm-hmm. And that's the key, right? Everyone's looking at it differently. And you have this, I know we don't want to always say it, but this little unknown entity out there, and that is the world of assistance and all the supporting type of operations that go with it, hanging out here. And when you look at, I'm going to equate it to technology, to the question of how can our voice be brought out. Technology world these days has evolved to everybody saying it's the information. Information's my value, right? That's my selling point. The information gained through the assistance world is just, it's unreal, right? You have ministries of health, you've got all these organizations, again, looking at this giant macro problem set. But yet when you look at the micro level of information on how many evacs are done, why, what was the case complexities, what level of standards of care exist in this country, and there's wealth of knowledge. It's not shared. So there are, I think, simple things we can do to bring a little bit of collective voice together. Now the question then is, where does it go? So it's a very philosophical but complex question because there are so many uncoordinated views and perspectives and money just thrown at it. A quick vignette. I was doing a hospital survey in a remote town in the middle of South Sudan. And you had the US government ready to buy CT scanners. And literally, physicians are looking at people saying, no, my nurse doesn't know how to fight basic infection. I don't need these things. So the problem is complex. You have a lot of people throwing a lot of money at it, but yet you've got this world that we live in that is ripe with information that can help influence and help educate folks in a different perspective than they're used to.
Yeah, I think I support that, and also Dr. Munir's point that I think that if we look at the human elephant, if you look at healthcare, 60 to 70% of healthcare costs are always on staff, and the technology is only a small actual percentage of the spending in healthcare. And if we look at Africa as a issue as we are now, personally, I'm very upset that the healthcare staff don't get supported They don't get enough money. They don't get enough chances for growth and for opportunity. So I think that's a really good starting point, is with the healthcare staff. And I think that the assistance companies and others could do a lot focusing on that ground level rather than, as you say, worrying about whether we get a new CT scanner or whatever, and listening to the local voices to say, well, what do you need? And it might be a nurse in a hospital in Africa or a clinic saying, I don't have childcare. And the solution to that might be relatively simple. There may be somebody who could say, well, we can fund childcare, and that might be the difference between her doing a 8-hour shift and a 4-hour shift without worries.
I think you hit the nail on the head. They listen to what they need, and they know what they need. Yeah. Also, just an analogy with the Madagascar clinic. When they started the family planning clinic, the ladies were coming back pregnant. And when inquiring as to how is this happening, they were selling the medication. So they were given oral medication, and they were leaving, and they were selling it to buy food. And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's those social determinants that provide the right conditions and the needs hierarchy that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
So it's really addressing those before we start getting too clever with what we're trying to do. Add on top of that. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, and I do believe in a lot of that. I do quite a few sessions on, I call them educational days or informative days, and I do it with funeral directors. And we actually do it with, funny enough, it's not particularly Africa, but we can relate to it. I do a lot with UK funeral directors, and you'd think, well, why do you do that? And it's because it's the seeking to understand what happens abroad. A lot of funeral directors see all of the documentation, see an embalming certificate, and automatically make the assumption that embalming is to BIE standards, which in the UK, when you embalm, you could go 3, 4, 5 a month, whatever, before things start to go wrong. So that causes problems with families because the funeral directors aren't doing what they're supposed to do immediately when somebody arrives home. We have a coroner system in the UK, so every case that comes back into the UK goes in front of the coroner. They review the paperwork, and then they decide if they're happy with the cause of death, with the identification, and then they issue the necessary permits for us to proceed with our funerals. I spend a lot of time, and we do it off our own back, going around the United Kingdom. 2 funeral directors that will allow us in. Now, we do run 2 helplines in the UK, the NAFD, which is the National Association of Funeral Directors, and SAFE, which is Independent Funeral Directors. So they contact us for advice anyway. It's a free service to any funeral director. They do not pay for it. Okay, so we do that, but I also travel out. But I don't just travel out to funeral directors. I go out to assistance companies, and I speak to coordinators. And again, it's that gentle education. Not teaching anybody how to do their job, because you don't want to upset anybody, but just giving them a little bit of knowledge, because then the next time they get that next case, it's going to be so much easier, and they're going to feel more equipped to deal with it. The other thing I also do it with embassies in London. So it's various different things. I haven't started to go abroad and do that, and I think the initiative you've got going is absolutely brilliant. But if you could even start, and even if you could even start from a technology point of view on platforms and put these little sessions out there. Nothing much. You're not telling anybody how to do their jobs or what they should or shouldn't do. We all go to these sessions, which I always enjoy, and everybody can walk away having learned something new. There might be a lot of stuff that you're used to, but you're always going to walk away with something. And even if you can get somebody to walk away with that little something, you're a lot better off than when you started. So, yeah, that's my take on it.
Confirm what Ran said, that as I see, that we have to believe in one thing, that we are the realistic part of every what is going on. For COVID time, for example, if we get back, the media show us something, but we are the realistic because we are in every small step of this crisis. Whatever involving in our industry, from our industry, we have the reality. The media sometimes, every country separate, showing us sometimes very far away from the reality, let's say. So for our interior industry, I believe that we have to believe in the reality which we have. People struggling in hospitals, in quarantine, in whatever is going on, media showing something, and everyone is reacting, and everyone is struggling what media showing. But we are the, I say that we are the database. We have the reality, the real database, and we have to follow it to make our life to each other easy, and to make it easier for as a human being, for people themselves. When, for example, quarantine, people are struggling and their family outside abroad struggling, and we found out that they don't need even quarantine, but they are healthy, totally healthy. So the changes has been happening, has to learn us how to be in reality, how to be transparent, and to transfer the reality to each other and to the people, even if it is, let's say, maybe it's political, but maybe it's even if it's against what is the media showing us, because this is get people a little trust, because people was in a time where they lost the trust, they didn't know where to believe. But if you see our assistance sector were involving in every small step and detail in the crisis. Whatever assistance, whatever remain, whatever air ambulance, we are very involved, very close to the people. So we start to be, we are really the sound of people. So we have to believe in that, and we have to work on that. This is what it changes. We have to believe on it, out of how it goes with maximum benefit or not maximum benefit. But we have to believe that we are the sound of a people who can really change a lot. Not just following what is going on. Every country has its own politics, his own point of view. So, but we are together the reality. We are transferring data, very sensitive. We are transferring data with really big details. If you catch up on the land, we are on the land. So we are not just talking from a TV. We are transferring between each other in every small event. We are transferring a very sensitive data, which is given us. For example, you will hear a lot in media, but you have to take your information in Qatar Wallet from me, because I am on the spot. I know what is going on. They will tell you have to do that, but I will tell you what exactly you have to do. So we have to go back with a big trust in order to be really put in our hand where is the reality, not to just to follow what is going on by mails or by TV or by social media. It was a big stuck for everyone, where to go, where to believe. So this is also, I believe on it, that I have to take my information from my trusted partner and being in reality. Whatever you talk about Africa, the doctor is the only one touch base on the reality, because he was already in a trial. I'm a one who was on a spot, so I see the reality. This is the changes that we have to follow to improve, or to be like interfering with everything.
No, I love that, and I know that we're here to talk about the challenges and the problems before we even start to think about solving them. But one of the things that I'm hearing is that actually pooling together to collect data, to create playbooks, if you like, using that terminology, to support each other in communicating and to build those education programs as well. But also, given the fact that we have so much incredible technology at our disposal, blockchain and the likes, being able to build a secure environment that enables us to put forward that on the ground perspective which ultimately needs external validation, because otherwise, well, we could technically say whatever we like. So we need to have those checks and balances in place. But as you quite rightly said, as an alternative view to the media, they have their own agenda.
Yeah, exactly.
So if we have a more human-focused, not that I'm disparaging the media, I don't mean to do that, but if we have a sort of more human-focused, a different set of objectives, and we could start to pull together and bring some sort of database together, I think that sounds like it could be worth a discussion as well. Let's put a pin in that one. Okay, perfect. So we're only on to question 3, and we've got about 25 minutes left. So question 3 really is all to do with stimulating conversation around breaking down barriers. So how do we break down barriers to find and implement solutions that can bring sub-Saharan Africa together, for example? And again, I'd like to start interrogating this by saying, well, what does that mean? What does breaking down barriers mean to us? What do we perceive those barriers to be? And really, how can we bring people together? So does anybody have a view on breaking down barriers?
Yeah, sure, I'll get started. I would say there's internal and external. The internal is easy. I think we all kind of lightly touched on it, but to be blunt, right? The more and more we share information with each other, the more and more we risk our own intellectual property. And that's something we as individual organizations have to almost accept. If we want to participate and do something, are we willing to say, okay, I'm gonna trust these individuals that I'm doing this with, right? So that would be an internal barrier, right? We are here to do business. We are for profit in this world. There's no NGOs here that I know of. So that is, I would say, an internal barrier. How far do we go with each other while still, appreciating that we're partners in spaces, but at the same time, yes, we are competitors in spaces. So external, that one's pretty complex. You've got, again, governments, internal and external there, because you've got foreign governments trying to persuade and influence local governments, give advice, with everything from health to policy, and how policy guides health, with aviation and regulation and everything that goes with it. So, to answer that question, how do we break down barriers? I think first we really identify those barriers. And then some of them might not break down. Some of them we may have to accept. This is going to be a barrier, and because of this, we're going to move in this direction like this. I'm not sure if I fully answered your question there, Lorian.
It does need to be fully answered. I mean, it's a lot about building the conversation, but it's a fantastic point.
Because it's a tough one, right? And look, I know that one piece. I know it's the elephant in the room, but I tick. You look around, you're like, okay, competitor, but partner, friend, colleague. So that's always an internal thing that we all have to accept as we move forward together. What does that mean for us from a business perspective? So
identifying those boundaries and what they are for each of us, what we're prepared to.
Comfortable with.
Yeah, exactly, absolutely. No, that's it.
I think be prepared for failure and fail fast. I think that a lot of things people don't do because they're worried about failing. Certain things fail. Just do things and see if it works. And if it fails, learn from the failure and pivot and then do it differently.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of my famous phrases is, where there's a will, there's always a way. And I agree. You may fall down a few times, but you pick yourself back up. And there's always a solution. Well, there's a solution to every problem. I mean, obviously some are more complex than others, but it's just about perseverance, isn't it? And seeking to understand the whys, and then you can kind of work together to try and implement whatever it takes to try and implement change. And in some instances, you're right. Some of the governments, you may come across difficulties. I do work with the Metropolitan Police, with the family liaison officers, and each district, you're laughing, each district well, each different section of the Met Police, there's different levels. They just don't communicate amongst them. And so I was sitting at a seminar once and I had all these different groups and it was major one. And I was just observing and listening, and at the end, questions. And I thought, do I ask this or do I not? I was trying to be brave enough to say it. And I just asked the question, all these different FLOs from all these different sections, do you actually talk to each other? Because a family's got an FLO appointed there, and then another one there, and another one there. But are you guys all communicating? Are you delivering the same message? And the answer is no, they don't. They do not internally communicate, which I find, in my world, I find quite bizarre. Because I think if you communicate, you've got the consistency, haven't you? But it's really difficult, and that, you know, those would be challenges with government. But you know, it's all about perseverance, isn't it? If you've got the will to do something, it may take a while, but there's always a way. Positive attitude.
Absolutely.
You need to, from the beginning, just establish, you know, how large or small the things are that you're going to tackle. And large things will take longer, but smaller ones can be accomplished a lot quicker.
Yeah, start with small chunks.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely
chunks.
what we'd like to do.
Yeah.
Is once we've determined that there are some challenges that we can all agree upon, it's a case of stratifying them, isn't it? Let's look at the scope. Let's look at, you know, the different barriers that are involved and what changes may be required to really start to effectively tackle that. And then there's the low-hanging fruit that we can potentially all look to solve relatively smoothly and quickly, famous last words. And then there are the ones that we know that in this world of instant gratification, actually, we're all just going to have to be really patient and just keep plugging away. It's the long view, isn't it? Absolutely. So, okay, super. So with that, let's move on. I do have about 9 of these questions, but I would like to just say at this point, with sort of 15 minutes left, that if you are happy to continue the conversation and keep picking up on the additional pieces that we don't get around to today, that we can potentially have a virtual round table to continue the discussion at a time that's convenient for all of us. So feel free to give as much information as you would like. So in terms of question 4, let me just wake up my own laptop and my brain. So what are the most common misconceptions about healthcare access and the provision of medical services in Africa? So I'm sure we could all write a book on this one, but Shane, you're nodding your head a lot there. That obviously rings a bell with you.
Yeah. I think it comes back to also, you know, just acquainting yourself in the areas that you're working, what is there. I think we take a one-size-fits-all approach and think what I'm seeing here is what's happening there, and that's almost always not the case in Africa.
Well, one size rarely fits all anymore. I think that model is absolutely obsolete this day and age.
You know, we see as a provider from an assistance company perspective, you don't see changes in policies and procedures when managing Medivacs and things like that from how they would normally be managed in any other place in the world. But there are a lot more challenges involved which cause delays and things like that.
Sorry, I'm hopeless at multitasking. I'm trying to write and think at the same time. But just in terms of those procedures that you mentioned there, there was absolutely something that mentioned that we were talking about earlier, and I think it's absolutely just kind of looking at really understanding the nuances of business, the nuances of each individual place, and the nuances of even, you know, who happens to be on your team and in your immediate environment at the time, and some of that you can account for, and some of it you can't. So just coming back to sort of misconceptions and myths, is there anything else that really sort of stands out as, as being critical that we really start to take the education model to re-educate in terms of how you access healthcare, or looking at the digital solutions, how we can really start to sort of build bridges and give people that access as well.
I'll jump in, and it's kind of the dovetailing off of the terms you used. I think a big misconception is everybody looks at Africa as a whole, right? And Charlie started it out. It's a continent.
Mm-hmm.
We have to remind half the world that it's a continent. And Shane, your map shows just the size of it. There are some high caliber, world-renowned physicians and centers and capabilities on the continent. But so many people look at the continent as, okay, it's all down here. It's one standard of care. No, it's not. You've got some extremely high standard levels of care with some very talented folks. Because of the continent, it's some of the world's best with infectious disease. Why? Because they deal with it the most. If you want high-level trauma, go to New York, where they've got massive trauma every day. But yet there's some world-renowned burn centers in SA. You've got a lot of this. And the reason I bring it up is it's a large misconception, because even in the diplomatic community where I came from,
Mm-hmm.
they still have that same misconception, because the vast majority of the diplomatic community on continent, they do what a former ambassador of mine referenced as, diplomacy from behind bulletproof glass.
Mm-hmm.
They live in a bubble. They live in a bubble, and their bubble is whatever Ministry of Health, for example, they're dealing with. They don't rarely get outside that bubble. And I'll go back to us and our industry. Our industry is the orchestrator, right, of operations. That's our job, logistics management of delivery of service, standard of care, value-based care, pulling in all these resources, making the machine work, and understanding where are those centers of excellence that we can leverage on continent now. So I think that's a big misconception. So many people out of our industry and beyond look at the continent as a whole, and they make this grave misconception that all of sub-Saharan Africa is one standard of care.
Mm. And in the session we were attending this morning at ITIC, and I can't remember who it was that was talking about it, just information overload, but they were really noting the difference between pre-COVID and now in terms of people's attitudes to local care. So as an expat community, you're used to a certain level of care, and are used to being able to pick up the phone and say, actually, can you please remove my family member back to a centre of excellence in our home country, or it's very rarely in the local environment, because that's not what they equate with levels of good service, and they don't necessarily trust it, and that maybe comes down to cultural misunderstandings as well. So I think cultural competency is probably a big misconception and something that we need to address. But in terms of the COVID-19 influence, it's really that pre-COVID, everybody would say, take me home. Whereas after post-COVID, or not that we're in a post-COVID world, because I don't think it's ever going anywhere, but people are much more open now, because they didn't have the choice, to investigating more local options. And as a result, the local options have had an influx of potentially funding. There's new equipment, which equates to a little bit of medical inflation and things like that. But I was just wondering if that's something that you have experienced as well, where people are more willing to investigate, not necessarily the centres of excellence locally, but care locally as well. Has COVID helped to break down some misconceptions?
I don't think so.
No? Interesting. Controversial.
I don't think so. I can see just we are still talking and we are still far away from the land, like from the reality in Africa. Just this is what is the most misconception, that like we're far away from Africa. We're not very close to Africa. I have maybe it sounds strange, but I have something in last I don't know how many years, maybe Charlotte is remembering. I was always like hiring people for. I'm making big marketing team, big IT team, and my level of business is not for that much team. And she was asking me always, why you do that? And for maybe 2 years or 3 years, I told her, Charlotte, I'm just doing for something very big. And believe me, I don't know what is this. What is this big thing? I don't know what I'm planning for. But from point of view, from a business point of view, it sounds strange, but I don't know. Sometimes I'm going everything by opposite side, let's say. So in Africa, we have the same problem that we are not close to Africa. We are very afraid because we are counting everything business-wise, benefit-wise. But by fact, this is even what I decided finally when I start to build something, a program in Kenya, Uganda as well. We have to prepare for something big. And in order to prepare for something big, you have to spend and you have to wave your eye about the benefits for sometimes. This is where business people stuck in a theory of chicken or egg. What is first? So some businesses stuck in a level that to spend and get benefit, or I'm waiting to get benefits, then I will spend. Like that, chicken or egg. But in the end, we have always, believe me, for long-term business or whatever we are talking about, we have to choose the chicken. Because the chicken, it can get us a lot of egg. But one egg can get us one chicken. And we don't know, this chicken will get us egg or no, let's say. So, no, I'm sorry if I'm talking that way, but it is a fact. It's a fact that we have, because I look to the question number 5, and what I'm talking about now, it will also match with the question number 5.
Okay.
That we have to plan something in Africa. We are talking by our level. Our level. We are not a government. We are not a Ministry of Health, but we can do a lot. We are together can do a lot. Everyone in his part, in his sector can do a lot. For example, there is ITIC every year, everywhere. Why there is no ITIC in Africa? Let's say, okay, MENA, we do in Dubai, luxury. But why not in Africa? For example, there is a lot of associations that are building together in our industry. Why there is no this association in Africa? That's why we are very far away from Africa. We are very afraid to be in very deep because we are afraid to spend without benefit. But just believe me, we have to do that. If we do not do that, let's step back and not even think what it will be later, because nothing will be. If we didn't spend, if we didn't really be strong enough to have a long-term plan with no benefit for some times, then okay, your benefits will come, 100% will come, because you are thinking by a human point of view as well, not just by the benefit. This is my opinion, it's my style of business, let's say, to choose the chicken. Even if it will not give me egg, I will eat it, and it will close my hunger, you know. So this is how our direction should be, to think. If we're talking about specific Africa, we have to be close to Africa. We have to build something that from this thing we can move, we can be on the spot. Other than, we will just have a knowledge about the service which we do, that we are very happy, and they will say, good team, that mission done. And will not have anything more, except from the media, which will never give you the fact. Yeah. I'm sorry again. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. But I just wanted to clarify, who's the chicken in this scenario? It's not me. You keep looking at me. So yes, we do, as Charlie just quite rightly pointed out, we really only have 5 or so minutes left, unless anybody's happy to to stay. But I'd really love to hear, or we would really love to hear, on anything that we've discussed so far. Does anybody have anything that they'd like to add, or questions of your own you'd like to pose at all? Tumbleweed.
Where do we start?
Yes, absolutely. It's a big question.
Well, I think on that question, Lauren, I think the consistent thing that I've heard from all the speakers is is you have to start somewhere. You know, we
Yes.
have to pick something.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be huge. We're not going to sort of solve, you know, all
Yes.
of the issues in Africa. But between us, we can take these challenges away and then try and, you know, get a little bit more granular, share some data, find out where there are issues that are perhaps an opportunity for us to try it, test it, do something. And I think around those, around the things that we can influence with data and education, but then to take that and actually try something. And I think that's the thing I've taken away. And I'm excited about it. I think we can move forward and actually try something. I think the you know, the example in Shane's presentation of the lady that just started with a little sort of clinic under a tree in the garden, and then, you know, before long brought people along with her and got that sort of get us to believe in that message and get other people around. We all have various partners and sponsors and clients and things that I'm sure would take on such a good cause as this. And I think it would be great if we could, you know, find a couple of you know, real action points that we can maintain away. And I appreciate I'm getting to the solution that's just before with, but I'm really excited by it. This is a great initiative.
Perfect. Is there anything, anybody else? Yes, please.
Well, I speak as an African, one that's lived from one side of the continent to the other for a long time. But we don't trust you, and we don't trust each other. And that's just really historical. Most people deal with Africans for one purpose, and that's to come and take away, and to get what they can, and to, you know, build themselves at the expense of Africans. So, I mean, I was having a meeting with a Canadian today who asked me about payments, and he said, no, put the money in the bank and then we'll fly. And I think he was quite shocked by that because there's no trust. And I said, well, we don't trust people because we've been left high and dry and haven't been paid in the past, and we've learned our lessons, and that's why we don't trust you, because we've been burnt by you. And that's a mentality of Africa, but it's a mentality that's been born over centuries of mistrust because of abuse. For the most part, and we do it to each other too, so it's not just external. But the big take home for myself from listening to everybody here is that you've got to commit yourself first. You've got to put your chicken out there. Don't put yourself in it. Get close to the community. You can't do this by arm's length, try and build a business and go and put yourself in it. Go and get close to it yourself and get your feet dirty, get your hands dirty, get involved with it yourself on the ground. Put your money into it, commit to it, and then it doesn't matter how small it is. I mean, you know, I think if you look at the African continent, you get overwhelmed fairly fast. And the one way you can overcome that fairly quickly is by starting. And even if it's small, like our young lady in Taraknara in Madagascar. You know, I think when she decided, well, I'm going to stick around here, I want to put myself out there, I want to invest my own money here, and I'm going to start. I can tell you there were a lot of people that shook their heads, and mums and dads and cousins that said, what the heck are you doing? You know, you're crazy, you know, this is nuts. Why would you want to do this? They're not saying that now. And there's communities, and there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. And the companies now that would put money into that to back it now, they're not saying it now. So my advice as an African is if you want people to trust you, and you want to build something in Africa, get into Africa exactly like you said, Manya. Put yourself out there, invest yourself into it and your money into it. And then people will take you more seriously, and then don't be overwhelmed by how big it is. Start. Start in one country and one project. And I think you'll be quite surprised in a few years' time when you're sitting back and you look at what does happen, because let me tell you, Africa, when it does get behind you, when it does trust you, there's a massive resource there.
I love that. More goosebumps.
So my action next event should be in Africa. This is my action. That's how I said.
Absolutely.
I would echo what Mark said about trust. It's huge, right? And I'm going to say something that's slightly controversial. It's still ongoing because you have some, and I'm going to stress the word some, not-for-profits and some for-profits that do certain things to provide aid to help to elevate, but they do just enough to keep the machine going because they don't want the need to stop, because when it does, their revenue stops. And there's challenges with that, both internally in internal governments as well as the external actors. So that distrust is not just legacy. That distrust is still ongoing.
And it's valid.
Absolutely, it's valid. 100%.
The other thing I'd just like to throw in the ring is this issue around measurement. Because if you look at donors rely on being able to measure things. And because they rely on being able to measure things, people only do what donors measure. And that's not necessarily what needs to be done. So I think getting out of that mentality and realizing there are really great things you can do that don't have a formal metric that meets a Western donor's standards, but it's really helpful. Just also do those things.
Yeah, quite right. Absolutely. Fabulous. All right. Well, I think, so in terms of, as you can see, number of questions that I'm skipping past here. But I think in terms of next steps, I'll just quickly sort of reiterate that what we'd really like to do is to be able to continue this conversation, providing that you're not sick of the sound of my voice yet, and that you'd still like to be involved. And as
chicken I've met in a long time.
Thank you very much. And if anybody else would like to join the conversation, please let us know, because we would absolutely love to have you. So the next steps for us, I think, are really going to be to reconvene and to pick up the conversation so that we can go through some more of these questions. I would also then like to drill down a little bit further into some of the topics that we have discussed and actually start to quantify some of that. So I'll be working with people far cleverer than I to put together a survey. And if you're happy to take part in a short survey so that we can really get some numbers and some data behind that, again, which we can validate with some external research and things like that. And then we can go to putting together a report for all of us to contribute to and collectively own. And that really, I think, is our future plan. So we would absolutely like to put a time scale to that, but it is flexible. We're all very, very busy. Appreciate that everybody has their own commitments and they're really doing this very much off the side of their desks. But we really hope that you feel it's as worthwhile as we do. So, and then in terms of just if anybody wanted to ask me any questions at all about the phases, please do. If anybody has any thoughts on that or questions at the moment? No? Perfect. All right. Erandi, anything else that you'd like to say?
No, just thank you. Absolutely thank you. And look, this discussion is just that, right? It's a discussion. It's a opening gesture to a collaborative forum. It is not one of our companies just putting ourselves out there. No, this is a collective group here, and that's the one thing I want to stress. That, and right now it's just open to whatever lies ahead. You know, if we're willing to continue the discussion, great. We'll see where it goes. You know, we'll see what chicken develops. You know, and look, you know, again, back to that comment. Yes, we're in a competitive space. We're in a space where we collaborate. We work as partners. It is such a unique industry in that regard, right? At this stage, let's keep an open mind if you're willing to continue to have a conversation. As Lorian said, those who'd like to join, please let us know and join in the conversation, and let's see where it goes. Simple as that.
Thank you so much, everybody.